Our next reader is another writer I've been a big fan of for a long time. Antonya Nelson is the author of 10 books. Among them are 4 novels, including Bound, Talking in Bed, Living to Tell, and Nobody's Girl. And she's the author of 6 story collections, including Some Fun, Nothing Right, Female Trouble, The Expendables, Family Terrorists, and her first book, I think, In the Land of Men. A couple of her books are up here for sale, by the way, and after the reading, if you'd like to look at them or buy even, I'm sure the author will be happy to sign them for you. While I'm mentioning this, by the way, if you're here from Professor Eisenberg's class, before you leave, you'll want to sign the sign-up sheet down here, too. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, in Esquire, Harper's, Red Book, and many other magazines, as well as in anthologies such as the Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards, Best American Short Stories, and as I mentioned before, she shares the Cullen Chair in Creative Writing at the University of Houston with her husband, Robert Boswell, the insensitive. No. Nelson's most recent book, I believe, is a novel called Bound, set in Wichita. It's about the unusual legacy left to the main character by a childhood friend. At the heart of the novel is an auto accident, and the novel kind of expands from that terrible moment in time in ever-widening circles of narrative. The opening chapter alone is a showpiece, an advanced class in writing fiction all on its own, for its style, for its control of tone and point of view, for its deep-seated compassion, and for its love of the quirky. Her subjects most often are adolescence, especially those aspects of adolescence that cling to us for our entire lives. Middle America, love and sex, drinking, loyalty, in other words, all the things that matter, right? And dogs, always and forever dogs. Oh, and I forgot danger. In a story or novel by Antonya Nelson, danger is never very far away. It's just around the corner. It's right over there in the shadows. She has the class consciousness of Raymond Carver and the precise prose style of Alice Munro. Her work is smart and inclusive. It moves out to embrace the world, honoring the everyday comedy and tragedy of real life. Her characters are tough-minded yet full of feeling. They come to us bearing the scars of their personal histories, unfurling the flags of their tattered hearts. Please welcome Antonya Nelson.
Thanks for that nice intro. Thank you for coming, and thank you for having me here. I'm going to read the most recent short story I wrote, just because it's nice to sort of take the temperature of a story by hearing how it's received. So I thought that would be a good thing, a sort of little frightening thing, but also a good thing for me to do. So this is the most recent story I've written, and it's called Chapter 2. Tired of telling her own story at AA, Hill was trying to tell the one of her neighbor. It had been a peculiar week. So she comes to my house a few nights ago, Hill began, like around 9, bing bong, drunk as a skunk as usual, right in the middle of this show my roommate and I are watching. I go to the door, and there she is, 50-something, a totally naked lady standing under the porch light. Even at the time, it had seemed designed to charm her coy, drunken neighbor sporting a plaid pork pie hat and holding a toothbrush like a flag, flower, or torch. Choreographed, at least, and embarrassing to behold. Bergeron love, grande dame in her own mind, and all around the block. Looks like somebody's not getting enough attention, Hill had murmured as she unlocked the door. The night was soggy, Houston autumn, frogs like squeeze boxes wheezing in and out. Her neighbor's nakedness seemed sad and enervated, breasts flat on her chest, kind of melted look to the rest of her flesh, ankles thick on splayed feet. Southern belle in decline, a dismal after picture. "You gonna invite me in?" Bergeron Love demanded, raising her eyebrows flirtily in an attempt to rally her own outlandishness. She was known in the neighborhood for being a character, some composite of Miss Havisham, Nora Desmond, Scarlett O'Hara. Her ancient family manse with its aspect of ruined wedding cake, fenced as if to contain inmates, its fetid kidney-shaped pool where her multiple orange cats congregated. Sometimes Bergeron's antics were whimsical, crashing a dinner or cocktail party, for example, or commissioning someone in a gorilla suit to deliver balloons. And sometimes they were a serious pain in the ass, reporting overgrown lawns or loose dogs or long-term parked cars, more than once phoning the CPS. "You can't exactly say no to a naked lady on your doorstep, can you?" Hill asked rhetorically at the meeting. She made eye contact with the smiling older man holding the leash of his helper animal. There ought always to be a blind man grinning encouragingly, receptively in the audience, wavy white hair like meringue. The dog lay panting at his feet, head grasped a little unnaturally high by the leash, by the man's inability to see. The man's genial countenance was generic. Through every story, no matter how unpleasant, he smiled benignly beneath his lovely hair. He had, Hill thought, become like the dog himself, unable to judge. My roommate never met my neighbor before, so I introduced them. How strange to see a clothed person shake hands with a naked one, like the meeting of two utterly different tribes. "Bergeron Love, this is Janine." "Nice to meet you," said Janine. "Janine is getting her degree at the U," Hill offered, "in social work," she added, since Janine was shy. "Ha," said Bergeron Love, raising her toothbrush. "You can consider this visit a piece of immersion homework." "What the hell is that?" she asked, aiming the brush as she paused at the paused image on the television. "A bullet puncturing somebody's heart in slow motion," Janine said. On the screen, a few perfect circles. Bullet, organ, splatter. "Not actually," she added. "Well, obviously not actually," Bergeron said. "One of those true crime shows? I love those, but my boyfriend Boyd can't take it. He literally cannot watch gore. Isn't that just typical?" Boyfriend Boyd was a mousy man who donned an orange vest every school day morning and stood blowing into a whistle on the corner of Westheimer and Taft, waving his arms to help the children across. He hid behind a pair of giant square glasses and a push-broom mustache. Only with his vivid vest and shrill whistle did he seem to have much confidence. Then, or after a few stiff drinks. "You want a robe, Bergeron?" Hill asked. The woman was going to either sit or fall down, and the chair nearest was the one Hill's teenage son preferred. "Why would I want a robe?" demanded Bergeron Love. "You got a problem with the human body? You're watching that shit on TV and you can't look at me?" "I just didn't want her naked butt on the chair where my son liked to sit," Hill explained to the AA meeting. "But she kind of collapses in his chair anyway and starts to ramble about her fucked up life. Sorry, Jim," Hill added. The blind man had flinched. His single admission, and all the time he'd come and taken up his role as accepting group focal point, was that the word fuck still hurt his feelings. He nodded now, recovered, forgiving. "Friday night," Bergeron Love was saying, "I'm walking up and down the street and I can't even get arrested." "That's partly your fault, you know, Berge," Hill said, explaining to Janine that it had been Bergeron Love years earlier who had been mostly responsible for rousting the homeless and the homeless shelter from the neighborhood. "Remember all those drunk bums?" Hill said. "Pissing in our yards," she recalled, leaving all their Sudafed trash in the park. "You don't know the half of what I kept off this street. Next, they wanted to turn that flop house into an AIDS clinic." "No, ma'am," said I. "But Berge, if those guys were still around, there'd have been more action out there tonight. You'd have had company. They would have been ecstatic to see you coming." And Bergeron Love laughed appreciatively, conceding, then wondered aloud what a person had to do to get a drink around here. "I had an open container until just a little bit ago," she explained. "There might be some broken glass out on your walkway. Sorry about that." Janine jumped at the chance to leave the room. "That is a big old gal," Bergeron Love whispered. Hill nodded. Janine was 3 times her own size. a woman who must have been eating most of the day to maintain her weight, and yet Hill had never seen her do it. Janine had her own shelves in the fridge and cupboards, plastic grocery bags came and went, and still Hill had never shared a meal with the woman. "You're lucky she's not the nudie here," said Bergeron, then added in a normal voice, "Where's your son? Out on a date? Raising some high school hell?" "He's here," Hill said. Her son was in his bedroom, listening to music on headphones, reading a philosophy book, texting with his school hours-only girlfriend. He led a quiet, self-contained life. His peers maybe frightened him. He wasn't ready quite yet to go unguarded into the night. After Hill went to bed, he and Janine would play complex and violent video games into the wee hours, keeping score, speaking a fascinating coded language with one another while adroitly operating their control devices, never taking their eyes from the divided screen. For this and other reasons, she was an excellent roommate to both Hill and Jeremy, her own social life nearly non-existent. Like Hill, she went to meetings to discuss her defining, overwhelming weakness. In the kitchen now, she would no doubt be devouring a frozen candy bar, in addition to mixing fresh gin and tonics. She insisted on keeping the chocolate hard frozen, despite the broken crown she'd incurred just last week. Addicts, Hill marveled, so dedicated. At a different AA meeting earlier in the week, Hill had started the story of her longtime neighbor Bergeron Love at a different point. "So my neighbor the drunk once reported another of our neighbors to Child Protective Services. This meeting was one solely composed of women. There was no friendly blind man upon whom to settle her eyes in that group. In fact, they were an altogether tougher audience overall than the meetings that included men. Less likely to forgive rambling or giggling shares, readier to call bullshit on somebody's tears. After my neighbor reported this guy, this huge tattooed Hispanic guy who was supposedly abusing his daughters, he started stalking her son. Bergeron's then 10-year-old boy, Alistair. Alistair the fair and pale, who'd later walked Hill's son around on Halloween, utterly unembarrassed by holding a 5-year-old's hand. Alistair was a good boy. Reporting the alleged abuse had been a lesson in minding your own business, Hill thought. Alistair had to be moved to another school. Restraining orders had been required. Bergeron Love's front yard was egged, her car graffitied, her most beautiful live oak killed by mysterious means. The tree fell on her porch. Her gentle son had been separated from his familiar friends. She never knew what to expect when she opened her front door in the morning. That man still lived in the neighborhood. His daughters and wife, to this day, had never said a word against him. But my neighbor knew, Hill told the group. She'd heard him through the bathroom window with the girls. "Don't, Daddy, don't. It hurts. Please, Daddy." Bergeron Love had gone from one house to another, pleading her case. Her car with its windshield covered in red spray paint parked at the curb for all to see. "Racist war," it said. "I know it's him because he didn't spray the car. He cares so much about cars he couldn't spray the metal." It was true that the man loved his vehicles. The house and yard were shabby, but his classic sedan and truck sat sparkling and cherry in the drive. "It just seems so unfair that her boy was suffering because of her," Hill went on to the room full of women, most of them mothers. Little Alistair Love. "I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, I guess, but she came to my house just the other night, bing bong, most likely lonely for her boy, I'm thinking now. He's all grown up now, living over in Austin." Occasionally, on a bad night in the past, she'd heard teenaged Alistair trying to negotiate with his mother and his mother's boyfriend Boyd when they took their drunken disagreements public to the street. With a few drinks in him, Boyd could overcome his timidity, like a person in the woods encountering a wild animal, acting bigger than he was, defensive yet false bravado. Their issues were forgettable, blame and counter-blame, outrage shouted upon outrage, insult on insult. But Bergeron's son's entreaties were always the same. "Come inside. Please get out of the street." Heartbreaking, that pleading, adenoidal voice. Every time she came to my door, it was, like, what fresh hell is this? I only ever saw her when she was drunk, but she must have had some kind of wits about her since she got shit done in our neighborhood, since she seemed to bring up a pretty good kid, mostly by herself. Bergeron the pitiful, His first and only marriage, it was rumored, had not lasted more than a summer. That gold-digging sperm donor ex-husband who left her both pregnant and poorer by half. Also, Bergeron the bully, who'd driven off the homeless and their shelter, who prevented the presence of probably harmless AIDS patients. Bergeron the hypocrite, who'd fought and lost many a zoning battle from the confines of her own sagging antebellum monstrosity, in need of paint and roofing and porch repair, not to mention the proliferating cat population, inbred and unhealthy. But at the evening women's meeting, Hill didn't mention what had happened that very morning. The ambulance and fire truck had roused the block at daybreak, pulling into place at Bergeron Love's front walk from either side, a dozen uniformed people hopping to action, everybody else stepping out in their sweatpants and bathrobes and mussed hair, arms crossed over their chests, curious about what, now, wacky Bergeron Love had set into motion. On that earlier, naked night, Hill had excused herself briefly from Bergeron and Janine in order to call boyfriend Boyd. From the study, she could see the Love house, the shape of Boyd through the tall front window watching television, but he wouldn't answer the phone on the first call. Oh, hell no, murmured Hill, dialing the number again. She could almost hear it ringing over there. Boyd rose this time and picked up. Hello, he said, as if he hadn't already seen who it was and caller ID, as if he had no idea what he was going to be told. He was a chinless man who had routinely and voluntarily let himself be bossed around, made small. Bergeron wouldn't marry him. Fool me once, shame on you, she'd said of the subject of marriage. Fool me twice, no ma'am. Wouldn't let him be anything other than her aging, sillily named boyfriend. You maybe want to come retrieve Bergeron, Hill had said to him. She told me she was setting out to get arrested. That hasn't come to pass just yet. I guess I could call the cops if you really think she needs all that drama. 5 minutes later, Boyd stood sheepishly at the door. Wearing clothes, Hill was grateful to see. But instead of pulling Bergeron out of Hill's house, Boyd accepted the reluctantly offered invitation inside and sat in the second of the blue chairs. Want a drink? Janine asked him, probably dying to sneak another chocolate bar for herself. Now that there seemed to be a party going on, Hill's son Jeremy joined the strange ensemble in the living room. He greeted Boyd first, then spotted Bergeron Love in his favorite chair wearing no clothes. He immediately averted his gaze, blushing, a gesture Bergeron pounced upon. You can't be shocked, she declared. Give me a break. I bet you've been all over the internet looking at porn. Boyd provided Jeremy with a grimacing shrug. Bergeron Love and her hat on the chair was nothing like internet porn. What are you, on drugs? Bergeron demanded of Jeremy's silence. Are you high? No, Jeremy said, now giving her a scornful glare. Did she know he was telling her in his way that he was fully aware he was the only sober person in the room? He next fixed his eyes on the television screen, where the bullet through the heart remained like a new piece of art on the wall, that mesmerizing solar system of bloody mayhem. You remind me of Alistair, Bergeron told him then. You remember my son, Alistair? Jeremy said he did. He didn't like to be asked direct questions either. He was embarrassed for his mom, too. Hill wanted to object. Jeremy wasn't embarrassed for her, was he? It wasn't Hill who routinely grew drunk and then was driven to getting a few things off her chest with anybody who'd listen. Hill had not tonight exited her house wearing nearly nothing to parade around in public. Jeremy went to Al-Anon meetings because his father had made it a condition of their custody arrangement. They're okay, he reported to his mother concerning those meetings. Lots of hugging. A little too much God talk for me. I don't say I'm an atheist anymore, though. That's a good lesson to learn wherever you hear it, she agreed. Alistair was embarrassed if he loved me, Bergeron went on. Not like Boyd here. Boyd doesn't love me. The people who love me are all gone except Alistair. Mother and Daddy, my brother George Jr., although not my brother Alistair. That's Alistair the First. Everybody dead and gone except Alistair the Second. I love you, Boyd put in. Sometimes it's like Alistair might as well be dead for as often as I see him, for as often as he seems to think of me. She paused, taking a breath, changing gear. And as for you, Boyd, you just learned how to say the words. I taught you those 3 words, and how I wish I hadn't. I might as well live with a parrot for all those words mean to you. Where's your dad, anyway? Bergeron asked Jeremy. Whatever happened to him? How'd you end up with this big old gal in your house instead? Hey now, said Hill. No need to be bitchy, Bergeron. You can be naked, and you can interrupt our TV program, but no getting flat out rude. Poor Jeremy. What would he tell those hugging teenagers at the next Al-Anon meeting? Did they, like AA, warn of the forbidden 13th step? Was it frowned upon to date their fellow members? Jeremy took a seat next to Janine on the couch, loyal to his late-night gaming buddy. As for Janine, she was studying the coffee table, the part in her hair a bright, humiliated red. Like many an obese woman, she tended to her hair and makeup fastidiously. Hill tried to remember if this was the same coffee table she and her husband brought when they moved into the house 20 years ago. Was it the same one on which Bergeron Love had stood during her first drunken visit to them, giving her city council campaign speech? Perhaps. Do you remember when you were running for city council? Hill asked. Which time, Boyd said. She's run more than once. And lost, he added quietly. A real reformer is never popular, Bergeron declared. 1990 or so, Hill said, you guys were canvassing the street, Bergeron stumping for herself on the Democratic ticket, and you, Boyd, signing up Republicans. You got on this very table to give your speech. Boyd, standing aside with his clipboard, as if knowing Bergeron was a perfect argument for the opposition. Jeremy and Janine laughed. Oh, make fun, said Bergeron. Go ahead. Bergeron loves a crackpot and nuisance. She struggled out of the blue chair now, a glass of ice in one hand, a toothbrush in the other. Nobody was ever grateful for anything I did. Nobody. Not you homeowners or your kids. Not you, Boyd, you damn cringing minor-bird. Not even my own son, Alistair. Not even Alistair. Everybody's a fucking ingrate. Why run for office? Why give a shit? Why have children? She demanded of Jeremy. Well, he said, taking a moment to put it politely, it's not exactly like he asked you to do it. At the meeting that was mostly men, mostly professional men in a medical district, they had laughed to hear about the naked social call, appreciating the ludicrous image, the backstory details of previous drunken escapades featuring wild-card Bergeron Love, even admiring Jeremy's visit-ending remark. That innocent teenage observation had diffused poor Bergeron Love, and Boyd was then able to rise from the matching blue chair he'd been occupying so ineffectually and guide her limply out the front door. Wow, Janine had said, talk about true crime. Yeah, said Jeremy, switching off the paused image in the television. At the front door, Hill had hugged Bergeron Love, taken into her arms that molten, clammy body. Don't tell Alistair, will you? Bergeron had said into Hill's ear, no longer angry, no longer anything but very tired. Don't tell my boy. After telling the medical district AA group all about it, after acknowledging their applause, the mild smile still on the blind man's face, Hill and her friend Joe went as usual to their favorite Mexican restaurant to debrief. Joe said, you didn't share the part about Bergeron Love being dead now. Yeah, that part would kind of ruin the fun. It doesn't feel like a satisfying third act. Everybody would get all ashamed when they found out they were laughing about a dead person, right? In between the naked visit and the heart attack was only about 5 days. Short shelf life for a crazy story. Exactly. Joe didn't care that Hill ordered a beer at Chewy's. It was his opinion that beer didn't actually count, as it took so much of it to provide a buzz. He hadn't had a drink in 5 years, but it had only been 2 hours since he downed a few Xanax. He was checking his watch to see when he could have another. You could tell the dead part next time, like it just happened. A follow-up on the first story. Next installment, chapter 2. Could do. You know, if it wasn't for you and blind Jim, I'd quit this meeting. Hill had first attended because the meeting was near the medical center and coincided with happy hour. Divorced, she thought she might need a doctor. Instead, she found Joe, a guy she'd known in high school, gay, also looking for a doctor. But I wanted to meet doctors because my dad was a doctor, and I liked the fact that these guys are just like him, and also, hello, they're no better than me. A syllogism Hill had supplied that makes perfect sense. Sort of. Maybe you can tell me why I've chosen to live with a porno addict, he then said. Same reason I live with a morbidly obese woman? It's good to have somebody else's bad habits around to put your own in perspective. Agreed. Also to compare and contrast, to get a little clarity. I should have known doctors wouldn't think of AA as a dating opportunity. In fact, the opposite. Live and learn, said Joe, or live and don't. Bergeron Love had been on the gurney, let out feet first, just as she might have predicted she'd exit that formerly lovely home, that place where she'd been born, raised, loved, and abandoned, only 5 days after having gone roaming naked through the street on which she'd lived forever, her last jaunt. On an unusually clear Wednesday, less than a week after that strange nocturnal visitation, the emergency equipment had screamed into the early morning quiet, halting at the gates of Bergeron Love's beautiful ruin. Boyd, the boyfriend, had come out to undo 3 generations of fence, the faded white picket one that matched the house, the black iron one with its spiky tips, and the hideous yet effective chain link concertina wire, the enclosure of the most recent vintage. Suicide, Hill had predicted. Bergeron Love had been making a farewell tour of the neighborhood, exposing herself, putting herself at risk because she no longer cared what happened. Also watching the action was the man who'd been reported for abuse. What was going through his head, Hill wondered. Good riddance, racist whore. Hill lied at AA meetings. She led a life of sobriety there. There she had not had a drink for 11 months now. It was soon going to be her fictitious 1-year mark. Telling the story of her neighbor was at least the truth. But was it a story? 20 years worth of half-known information. She told it at 2 different meetings, starting at different places. The naked visitation, the phone call to CPS. She could tell the version that began with Bergeron campaigning for city council, using the coffee table as a soapbox, Hill and her husband horrified and amused by their new neighbor, as yet still newlyweds, their moving boxes unpacked, their son a few years in the future. Or she could begin with a homeless man who'd been discovered lying beside Bergeron's kidney-shaped swimming pool one night, the man who'd somehow breached the various deterring fences, empty bottle of isopropyl alcohol in hand, and who would have died had Bergeron not summoned the ambulance, had she not moved with surprising, shrieking speed to get him aid. Or Hill could begin with the cocktail party Bergeron had once interrupted, pushing into Hill's house wearing an evening gown and trying to seduce her husband. "He's flirting with me," she'd gaily shrieked, laying her head on Hill's husband's chest. "Look out, Boyd, you've got competition. Careful, Hill, you'll lose him." Hill and her husband later laughing together in bed, as if he would be attracted to the likes of Bergeron Love, or to anybody else, he had declared then tenderly to Hill, holding her close and naked, romantic, affectionate, still hers. Not a suicide, the neighborhood learned from Boyd when the vehicles drove away soundlessly, their lights extinguished. Heart attack, very sudden, there in bed. She had grabbed his earlobe, he told one neighbor, illustrating by grabbing it himself. His face a shocked white, more mouse-like than ever. "She couldn't speak," said Boyd. That neighbor told the rest of them, and that was the end. Everyone went back inside. Bergeron's son would come home, Hill thought. He'd have to. It would be up to him to decide what to do with the Love estate, that grand squalid monument in which he'd been raised, the mosquito-ridden pool, those many cats, the lingering boyfriend. Meanwhile, Hill had found a new meeting nearby, one so close to her house she could walk there. Handily, there was a pub situated on the route home. Maybe she'd tell the story of her curious neighbor by starting with the son as a teenager, Alistair, him trying to keep his mother from trouble at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, shouting at her uselessly, "Please come back inside, Mom. Please, get out of the street."
there it is. Our guests have agreed to answer a couple of questions if anyone would like to ask.